What if the price of happiness was everything you thought you wanted? In a city of glass towers and sleepless hospitals, a nurse drowning in debt, and a billionaire haunted by guilt, cross paths where science meets compassion. One night, one child, and one impossible choice will test how far a human heart can go to save another. This is The Price of Happiness, a story about redemption, courage, and the kind of love money can't buy. The corridor of Grady Memorial Hospital was soaked in the same sterile light it always had, a thin pale glow that hummed faintly, like it too was exhausted. It was 2:04 a.m. The night outside Atlanta was thick with fog and silence, but in the pediatric wing sleep was a luxury no one could afford. Nia adjusted the edge of her scrubs, the fabric stiff from too many washes, and leaned closer to the little boy in the bed before her. The IV pump blinked rhythmically, an artificial heartbeat in the quiet. The boy's name was Sammy, 6 years old, diagnosed with leukemia 3 months ago. His eyelids fluttered weakly as the morphine dulled the pain. "You're brave, sweetheart," Nia whispered, brushing a curl of hair from his forehead. Her voice was soft, the kind of softness that only came from exhaustion worn into compassion. She sat on the edge of his bed, humming a half-forgotten tune her mother used to sing, "You Are My Sunshine." The sound drifted into the cold air, trembling slightly with fatigue. Sammy's breathing steadied. For a moment, the ward seemed to exhale with him, a fragile peace between the beeps and whirs of the machines. When she finally stood, her back ached. She checked the monitor, scribbled notes onto a clipboard, and moved to the next room. Her sneakers barely made a sound on the polished floor. Years of night shifts had taught her to glide through hallways like a shadow unseen, unthanked, indispensable. In the break room, the coffee pot gurgled half-heartedly, the kind of sound that promised more than it delivered. Nia poured herself a cup anyway. The bitter taste bit into her tongue. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't have to guess. Ms. Johnson. The voice was practiced smooth, professional, detached. "This is Heritage Medical Collections. We're calling regarding the outstanding balance from your mother's treatment." Nia turned away, clutching the phone tighter. Her reflection wavered in the vending machine glass, the hollow eyes, the tired bun, the faint stain of dried formula on her sleeve. "I told you I'd send the next payment after the 15th, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes, ma'am, but the balance has now accumulated late fees. If we don't receive—" She pressed the phone tighter to her ear, her free hand trembling. "Please, I'm working 2 shifts a day. I just need a little more time." There was a pause on the line, the kind of silence that confirmed what she already knew. The person on the other end didn't care. When the call ended, Nia stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she laughed, a sound more like an exhale than amusement, and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Even her tears felt routine now. She took another sip of coffee. It had gone cold. By 3 a.m., the ward was quieter. A lullaby of machines filled the space, heart monitors, ventilators, infusion pumps. Life reduced to lines and numbers. In room 218, Lila, a 4-year-old with neuroblastoma, whimpered in her sleep. Her small hand gripped a bald-headed doll. The skin on her wrist was so thin, Nia could see the faint blue veins underneath. "Hey, little fighter," Nia murmured, crouching down. "Bad dream again." Lila nodded, eyes glazed from medication. "You know what I do when I have bad dreams?" Nia smiled, taking the girl's tiny hand. "I tell them to go bother someone else. Works every time." That earned her a faint giggle. And in that instant, that brief fleeting laugh, the night didn't seem so heavy. She stayed beside Lila until the child fell back asleep. Only then did Nia notice the clock again. 3:47 a.m. Her body screamed for rest, but her heart refused to stop. At 4:30, she returned to the nurse's station. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, as if fighting to stay alive, much like the people under its glow. On the desk lay a stack of patient files. She reached for the top one, then froze when she saw the next name, Elijah Carter, age 8, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Her eyes softened. She remembered him, the new admission. No family listed. The note at the bottom read, "Awaiting sponsor for treatment." Nia let out a long breath. Another one, she murmured. It wasn't frustration, it was heartbreak, calcified into acceptance. At 5:00 a.m., she walked back into Sammy's room. The sunrise was beginning to leak through the narrow window, a streak of gold against the gray. Sammy stirred and opened his eyes weakly. "Hey, Nurse Nia," he whispered, voice raspy. "Did you stay all night again?" She smiled, tucking the blanket around him. Of course, someone has to make sure you don't run off and join the superheroes. He laughed faintly, and the sound warmed her chest. Then, after a pause, he asked Nia, "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. Happy. The word sounded foreign. She wanted to say yes. She always wanted to say yes, but her throat tightened. So, instead she smiled. "I'm happy when you're smiling," she said softly. Sammy nodded, seemingly satisfied. Within minutes, he was asleep again. Nia stayed a moment longer, tracing the outline of his little hand, resting on the sheets. The sun climbed higher, painting his pale skin in gold. For a second, it almost looked like he was glowing. She whispered almost to herself, "Maybe happiness doesn't have to be big." When her shift finally ended at 7 a.m., the day crew streamed in all bright scrubs and caffeine. Nia handed over the reports, tied her hair back tighter, and stepped outside. The Atlanta morning hit her face cold, sharp, alive. The sky was streaked pink, the kind of pink that only comes after long nights. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the last reminder of her mother, a crumpled photo of the two of them, at a park, both laughing, both free of worry. Written on the back in fading ink, "Keep smiling, my sunshine." Her eyes welled again, but she smiled the kind of smile that didn't deny the pain, but held it gently like something precious. The world kept moving, cars rushing, city lights blinking off, but for Nia, time slowed. Her feet ached, her heart heavy, her wallet nearly empty. Yet as she walked to the bus stop, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of a waking city, she felt something rare purpose. She thought of Sammy's laugh, of Lila's tiny hand, of the countless lives that flickered under hospital lights. And she realized she wasn't saving the world, but maybe in her own small way she was keeping it from falling apart. As she boarded the bus, her phone buzzed again. A new message from the hospital's group chat, big announcement today. BioNova Therapeutics just confirmed full sponsorship for the pediatric wing CEO, Caleb Wyatt, expected to visit this week. Nia blinked at the message. BioNova, she'd heard the name before. A massive biotech company famous for its miracle drugs and billion-dollar breakthroughs. She pocketed the phone and leaned her head against the window as the bus pulled away. The sun had risen fully now, flooding the city in gold. For a moment, her reflection in the glass looked almost peaceful. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fatigue and the debt and the quiet ache, a tiny spark flickered, not of hope, not yet, but of something that felt like it might someday become hope. The skyline of Atlanta glittered like a field of broken stars outside the second-floor window of BioNova Therapeutics. From where Caleb Wyatt stood, he could see everything. The polished veins of highways, the amber pulse of traffic lights, the faint fog rising from the city below. It was nearly midnight, but the office still hummed with the quiet mechanical breath of machines left running. Inside, the air was cold, the kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, but from absence. On the wall-mounted screen, a headline scrolled across the bottom. In bright, triumphant letters, BioNova reports 240% surge in revenue following successful release of Neurogene X. Caleb watched it without expression. The news anchor spoke in numbers, profits, partnerships, market expansion, all the words the world worshipped. And yet behind the glass of that immaculate office, the man who had made it all possible stood utterly still, his reflection caught between the light of success and the shadow of guilt. He pressed the remote. The screen went black. Now the only light came from the glass desk, where a dozen watches lay arranged in a precise circle. Vintage Omegas, Patek Philippe's, a Cartier with a cracked crystal. Each one was frozen at a different time. He picked up a silver pocket watch, its cover engraved with the initials E.W. Ethan Wyatt. The ticking had long stopped. He turned the watch in his palm thumb, grazing over the engraving, until his reflection distorted on the curved surface. That distortion was how he preferred to see himself, blurred, distant, incomplete. Somewhere deep within him, a voice began to whisper a memory, sharp as broken glass. "Why couldn't you save me, Caleb?" The memory came like it always did, without mercy. Flashback, 10 years ago. The Wyatt home smelled of antiseptic and lavender, the scent of surrender. Ethan lay on the bed, the skin around his eyes a thin shade of blue. The machines beeped softly, a lullaby of false hope. Caleb, 24 and freshly graduated from MIT, sat beside him, scribbling formulas in a notebook. His hair was disheveled, his eyes burning from nights without sleep. "Hang in there, buddy," he said, forcing a smile. "I'm close. Just one more adjustment. This compound..." Ethan coughed weakly, the sound like glass breaking. You said that yesterday, I know, but this time I mean it. I'm going to fix this. The boy smiled faintly, a smile too old for his age. You always say that. When his hand slipped from Caleb's, the world went silent. No alarms, no shouting, just silence so loud it shattered something inside him. Hours later, Caleb found himself in the lab, staring at a half-finished vial of blue liquid. His hands shook. He smashed it against the counter. The shards scattered like the seconds he could never reclaim. From that night on, he stopped wearing watches that ticked. The elevator chimed, in the present snapping him back. A voice followed, light, efficient, controlled. Still here, Mr. Wyatt. It was Diane, his assistant, impeccably dressed even at this hour. She carried a folder labeled Q4, Global Projection. Caleb didn't look up. You should go home, Diane. I could say the same for you, sir. He almost smiled. Almost. You're paid to care about schedules. I'm paid to defy them. She hesitated. The board wants you to speak at the hospital sponsorship event next week, the pediatric oncology wing. They said it would be good optics. That word again. Optics. He hated it. It meant everything but sincerity. Fine, he said, his tone flat. Send the details. When she left, he turned back to the glass window. Atlanta shimmered beneath him, alive, relentless. Yet behind that panoramic view, his reflection lingered ghost pale against the glass. The city looked vibrant, but his mirrored self looked dead. He exhaled slowly and looked down at his hand. The watch. Ethan's watch gleamed faintly. He held it to his ear out of habit. Silence. Time stopped. The day you died, he thought. Everything since has been noise. The door behind him opened again. This time it was Richard, the CFO, a man in his 50s with a permanent half-smile that could mean either approval or warning. Caleb, congratulations, Richard said, holding up a glass of champagne. 240%. That's record-breaking even by your standards. Caleb forced a polite nod. The patients deserve it more than we do. Richard chuckled. You really think the market cares about patients? They care about miracles, and you happen to make them. The word miracle stung. He turned away, gaze fixed on the glass city below. Miracles, he murmured, cost too many lives to be worth celebrating. Richard raised an eyebrow. You're too poetic for a businessman. I was never meant to be one. After Richard left, Caleb sat down at his desk. On the corner sat a framed photograph, he and Ethan years ago, standing in front of their old house. The younger boy grinning with a gap-toothed smile, clutching a toy stethoscope. Beneath it, Ethan's childish handwriting. One day I'll be the doctor, and you'll make the cure. Caleb's chest tightened. He reached for a pen and scribbled something on a scrap of paper, a phrase that came unbidden, almost like a confession. You can cure disease, but not regret. He set the pen down and leaned back, letting the city lights blur into a sea of gold and gray. For all his wealth, all his intellect, his life felt like that glass office, transparent, cold, and breakable. People envied the view from here, but they never realized what it cost to live surrounded by windows that reflected only yourself. The ghost in the glass stared back at him, sharp-jawed, handsome, haunted. Somewhere deep down, he wondered what Ethan would think of him now. Would he be proud? Or would he ask that same question again, the one that never stopped echoing? Why couldn't you save me, Caleb? He closed his eyes, the words hitting him like a pulse. Outside, dawn was beginning to seep into the city. Another day, another profit report, another round of applause for a man who hadn't felt worthy of clapping in years. He adjusted his tie, took one last look at the skyline, and whispered into the silence, maybe someday I'll make something that actually saves someone. The room didn't answer. Only the faint reflection in the glass nodded back, a ghost agreeing with itself.
Rất hay, chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục hành trình này một cách tuần tự, để mỗi chương đều mang chiều sâu cảm xúc, sự phát triển tâm lý tự nhiên và phong vị hiện đại kiểu Mỹ như hai chương đầu. Dưới đây là chương 3 được viết hoàn chỉnh theo dàn ý với văn phong điện ảnh, miêu tả tâm lý tinh tế và nhịp kế vừa đủ để cuốn người đọc vào cuộc gặp định mệnh giữa Nia và Caleb.
The hospital smelled of lemon disinfectant and fears, two scents that never quite left the walls. That morning, the pediatric ward at Grady Memorial was unusually bright. Banners with BioNova Therapeutics logos hung neatly across the entrance, and a podium had been set up beside the fish-shaped mural that usually cheered the children. Nurses whispered to each other, adjusting scrubs, half excited, half indifferent. It wasn't every day the CEO of a billion-dollar biotech company visited.
Nia adjusted her badge, the one that had started to fade around the edges from too many shifts. She'd been on since 5 a.m., and the caffeine had already worn off. A PR event wasn't part of her job description, but the head nurse had insisted all staff be present. Smile for the cameras, she'd said. So, Nia stood among the others, her hands still smelling faintly of sanitizer, her mind elsewhere on charts, dosages, and a little boy named Sammy, who'd just lost more hair that morning. The door slid open, and the room shifted. Caleb Wyatt walked in, flanked by 2 executives and a local news crew. Tall, composed, the kind of man whose presence seemed to quiet a room without him trying. His tailored navy suit caught the morning light. His tie was perfect. But what Nia noticed first wasn't his appearance, it was his eyes. They were sharp-focused and oddly distant, like they were always searching for something just out of reach. The hospital director stepped forward, all smiles. "Mr. Wyatt, welcome to Grady Memorial. We're honored to have BioNova's support for our pediatric wing." Flashbulbs went off. The camera crew circled like orbiting satellites. Caleb nodded, offering a practiced smile, the kind that belonged in Forbes interviews. "The honor's ours," he said smoothly. "These children deserve the best care science can offer." The words were right. The tone was perfect, but they landed cold. Nia watched from behind the crowd, arms folded. She'd heard that tone before, the voice of donors who saw suffering as a marketing opportunity. She tried not to care, but part of her burned with quiet irritation. Still, she had work to do. As the speech continued, a small commotion broke near the back. A little girl, Lila, had dropped her toy and burst into tears. The sound cut through the formal atmosphere like a sharp note of truth. Cameras turned, briefly annoyed at the interruption. Nia knelt immediately. Hey. "It's okay, sunshine," she murmured, picking up the doll. "See? She's just fine. A little brave girl, right?" Lila sniffled, nodding. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the scene, the nurse crouched beside a crying child, not caring about cameras or CEOs or spotlights. The way she smiled, tired but genuine, disarmed him. For a moment, the world around him blurred. The press, the numbers, the scripts, all background noise. He took a small step closer, almost without realizing it. After the event, as executives discussed photo angles and sound bites, Caleb found himself wandering toward the recovery area. The air was quieter here, softer. Children slept under warm blankets, surrounded by drawings taped to walls, clumsy crayon rainbows and stick figure families. Nia was there again this time, sitting beside Sammy, gently reading a picture book aloud. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind people use when they've learned to hide their own pain. She didn't notice him until the end of the story. When she did, her tone didn't change. "You shouldn't be here," she said plainly, not unkindly. "This area is off limits to visitors." Caleb hesitated. "I'm not really a visitor." "Then you're a donor," she said, closing the book, "which makes you even more off limits." That surprised him. "Excuse me?" She stood brushing her scrubs. "The kids don't need suits. They need people who don't flinch when they cry." The words hit harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of the monitor beeping interrupted Sammy stirring in his bed. Nia turned back instantly, her voice softening again. "Shh, I've got you, buddy." Caleb watched, saying nothing. There was something humbling about the way she moved, efficient, compassionate, utterly unconcerned with appearances. He felt small in her presence, though she was half his height. Later, when the tour concluded, the director offered to introduce him to the staff. Caleb agreed, out of courtesy, he told himself. But when they reached Nia, the director said, "This is Nurse Johnson, one of our best." Nia forced a polite nod. "Mr. Wyatt." "Miss Johnson," Caleb replied, his voice measured. "You do good work." "I try," she said simply. He looked around at the fading paint, the flickering lights, the outdated equipment. These conditions shouldn't exist in a hospital with this reputation. "Conditions don't treat patients," Nia replied. "People do." There it was again, that unvarnished honesty, the kind that couldn't be bought or intimidated. He wanted to say something clever, but for the first time in years, words failed him. That night, back in his office, Caleb replayed the day in fragments. The sound of the crying child, the nurse's calm voice, the way she'd looked at him not with admiration, not with contempt, but as if she could see through every layer of armor he'd built. He found himself standing before the circle of silent watches again. In the glass reflection, he saw her face flicker, behind his Nia's quiet strength, juxtaposed against his hollow success. He reached for Ethan's pocket watch, clutching it tightly.
You'd have liked her, he murmured into the stillness. Outside, the city glowed bright and unfeeling. Inside, a man who could buy anything stood wondering what it meant to truly earn something. The coffee shop sat on the corner across from Grady Memorial, wedged between a laundromat and a pharmacy. The place smelled faintly of espresso and rain-soaked asphalt. Nia had been coming here for years, not for the coffee. It was terrible, but because the barista never asked questions. After 12-hour shifts, that kind of silence was worth more than caffeine. That morning she sat by the window, a half-empty cup cooling in front of her. She was still in scrubs, hair tied up loosely, sneakers splattered with disinfectant. She was scrolling through her phone, reading a text from the collections agency. Payment past due, late fees added. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then locked the phone. The quiet ache in her chest felt familiar. Not panic, not despair, just exhaustion that went too deep for either. Then a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I sit here?" She looked up. Caleb Wyatt stood there, immaculate as ever, holding a cup of black coffee, like it was an accessory, not a need. His tie was gone, top button undone, but he still looked wildly out of place, a corporate king in a room full of mortals. Nia blinked. "You again," he smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a bad thing." "It's 9 in the morning, and I've been awake for 22 hours, she said, leaning back. "Right now, everything's a bad thing." He chuckled quietly and sat down without waiting for permission. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain tapped softly on the window, and Nia studied him, the perfect posture, the faint crease between his brows, the way he stirred his coffee, even though he hadn't added sugar. "So," she said finally, "did you get lost?" "I didn't think CEOs frequented places with flickering light bulbs." "I was hoping to find you," Caleb said simply. She frowned. "Me," he nodded. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday. You were remarkable with those kids." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's my job." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's more than that. You made them feel safe. I haven't seen that kind of presence in a long time." "Presence doesn't pay the bills," she muttered. Caleb hesitated. The opening he had been waiting for had just appeared, though it felt wrong to use it. Still, he leaned forward. "About that," he began carefully. "I heard from the hospital that you've been handling some financial burdens since your mother's passing." Nia's expression froze. He continued, his voice gentle. "Look, I know this might sound forward, but I'd like to help. I can clear your debt completely. Consider it a gesture of gratitude. You deserve to breathe again." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Nia stared at him, unable to believe he'd said it so plainly. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. But then she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the polished confidence of a man who'd solved every problem by signing a check. And something inside her, something quiet but fierce, snapped. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You want to pay off my debt?" "Yes," Caleb said, confusion flickering in his tone. "There's no catch. I just..." "Why?" Her voice rose low but sharp. "Because you feel bad. Because it'll make you sleep better." His mouth opened, then closed again. "No, because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping. "You think money fixes right and wrong?" "I think it helps," he said honestly. "You've done enough for others. Let someone help you for once." Nia looked at him for a long, unbearable moment, and then she shook her head. "You really don't get it. Get what? That I don't want your pity." Her tone trembled, not with anger, but pride, wounded, fragile, unyielding. "You think I'm drowning, but I'm working. Every shift, every child I hold, every bill I pay, it's mine. My struggle, my story. You don't get to buy a piece of it." The rain outside grew heavier, matching the storm between them. Caleb's expression faltered. He hadn't meant to offend, but that was the problem. He never had to think about what money meant to someone who didn't have it. "I wasn't trying to insult you," he said quietly. "I know," she said softer now, "but that's what makes it worse. You think kindness comes with a receipt. You don't see that some of us need to fight our way through things, not be rescued from them." Silence. Only the hum of the espresso machine filled the space. After a long pause, Nia exhaled, her tone calmer. "You want to help? Then do something that doesn't come with your name on a plaque." He frowned. "Such as..." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Spend 1 day a week at the hospital, as a volunteer. No cameras, no announcements, no PR team. Just you, the kids, and the noise you can't buy your way out of." Caleb stared at her, almost amused. "You want me to..." "Volunteer? I want you to feel something," she corrected. "Because I saw you yesterday. You walked through those rooms like a man afraid to touch the world. Her words hit him squarely. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Spend one day, she continued standing up and grabbing her bag. If you still think money fixes everything after that, then maybe it's me who doesn't get it. She started toward the door, but he called after her. Wait, she turned, eyebrow raised. Caleb hesitated, his voice quieter now, unsure for the first time. 1 day a week, that's all, Naya nodded. 1 day, every week, no excuses. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly, not his usual polished grin, but something more real, almost self-deprecating. You drive a hard bargain, Nurse Johnson. She shrugged. You're a big boy, Mr. Wyatt. I think you can handle it. And with that, she walked out into the rain scrubs, damp sneakers, squeaking shoulders squared. Caleb stayed behind, watching her through the window, the rain distorting her figure until she blurred into the city. He looked down at his coffee, untouched, cold. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out the silent pocket watch engraved EW. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of guilt pressing down. Instead, he felt something else, something unfamiliar, unsettling, and strangely alive. Maybe she was right. Maybe money couldn't buy everything. Maybe redemption demanded more than a check. He turned the watch over in his hand, whispering to the empty air. Guess I've got some work to do, Ethan. The first thing Caleb noticed was the smell. Hospitals, he realized, didn't smell like sickness. They smelled like cleaning agents pretending to erase it. When he stepped into Grady Memorial's pediatric wing that Saturday morning, everything felt smaller than he remembered. The ceilings lower, the walls brighter, the laughter, if you could call it that, thinner. He wasn't used to places where money didn't solve the atmosphere. Nia met him by the nurse's station. Arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You actually showed up, she said. Caleb straightened his jacket. I said I would. I half expected you to send a representative. You know, someone with a clipboard and an excuse. He smirked. Sorry to disappoint. She tossed him a pair of disposable gloves. You'll need these. He looked at them as though she'd handed him a weapon. For what exactly reality, she said simply, and walked off. His first task, sanitizing toys. A bin filled with worn-out plastic dinosaurs, faded blocks, and stuffed animals missing eyes sat before him. He dipped one into disinfectant, wiped, repeated. The smell of bleach was sharp enough to sting. Behind him, children's laughter and coughing tangled in the air. This is what you wanted me to do, he asked, trying not to sound defensive. Naya glanced over from where she was adjusting an IV line. That's step 1, he frowned. And step 2, keep going until you stop checking the time. He looked at the wall clock. 8:45. He'd been here 15 minutes. An hour later, his sleeves were damp and his patience frayed. The toys never seemed to end. Every time he finished a batch, another nurse dropped off more. Across the room, a child screamed not from pain, but frustration. Caleb froze. The sound hit something primal inside him, a sound he had heard once before, in a different room 10 years ago, when Ethan had begged him to stay awake. He turned away quickly, focusing on the bin, on anything but memory. Hey, mister, a small voice called. He looked up. A little boy no more than 5 stood a few feet away, bald from chemo, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Tougher than I look." Caleb blinked. Hey. The boy pointed at him. You're new. Yeah, first day. The boy nodded seriously. You're not very good at it. Nia, passing by, snorted. He's observant. Caleb sighed, muttering, I'll improve. The boy grinned. You better. Those dinosaurs are counting on you. Later, Naya assigned him to shadow her on rounds. He followed her down the hallway, clipboard in hand, like a nervous intern. Room 204. Lila, she said, checking a chart. Be gentle. She's shy. When they entered, Lila was curled under a blanket, the same doll in her arms. Good morning, sweetheart, Naya said softly. How's our warrior today? Lila peeked out, her voice barely audible, tired. Caleb hovered awkwardly by the door until Naya gestured him forward. Say hi. He cleared his throat. Hi. Lila blinked up at him. Are you a doctor? No, just helping out. She studied him for a moment, then asked, Are you scared of hospitals? The question caught him off guard. What makes you think that? You look like my dad when Mom made him visit, she said matter-of-factly. Naya laughed quietly. Caleb tried not to. I suppose that's fair, he admitted. Lila handed him the doll. Hold her while I get my blood drawn. She's braver than me. He took it gingerly as if it might break. When the nurse inserted the needle, Lila winced, squeezing Naya's hand. Caleb felt something twist in his chest, a helplessness he hadn't felt in years. When it was over, she smiled faintly. "You can give her back now." He placed the doll beside her pillow, whispering, "She's proud of you." Lila's eyes widened. "You made her talk." "Just this once," he said. She giggled, and Naya looked at him, a small approving smile tugging at her lips. By noon, he was exhausted in ways his wealth had never prepared him for. He sat in the break room nursing a cup of hospital coffee that tasted like burnt paper. Naya joined him, wiping her hands with a towel. "So," she said, "still think money fixes everything?" He looked down at the cup. "It fixes some things, but not the things that matter, apparently." "Apparently." She studied him for a moment. "You did well with Lila. She did all the work. Maybe. But you didn't run." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Trust me, I wanted to." The afternoon stretched on. He helped to hand out lunch trays, carried supplies, even read a story aloud when Naya was called away. His voice was hesitant at first, formal like someone giving a board presentation to 6-year-olds. But then one of them laughed. Another clapped. And slowly his words loosened. He forgot the cameras that weren't there, the suits, the titles. He just read. When the story ended, a boy tugged his sleeve. "You're not bad for a grown-up." "Thanks," he said, smiling genuinely this time. By the time his shift ended, the sun was low. He found Naya at the nurse's desk, typing up charts. "I survived," he said. "Barely," she teased. He hesitated, then added quietly, "It's different, being here. You see things you can't unsee. That's kind of the point," she said. He nodded slowly. "The kids, they're stronger than most adults I know. They don't have the luxury of pretending life's fair," Naya said softly. There was a silence between them, not awkward but thoughtful. Then she looked up, meeting his gaze. "You coming back next week?" He thought about it. The exhaustion, the noise, the sting of antiseptic that would follow him home. And then he thought of Lila's smile. "Yes," he said finally. "Next week." Naya nodded once. "Good. The dinosaurs will be relieved." That night, back in his apartment, Caleb stood before his collection of watches again. The room was dark except for the city light filtering through the glass. He picked up Ethan's pocket watch and held it against his ear, still silent. But this time, it didn't feel like accusation. It felt like memory. He could still hear Lila's laugh, the sound of small voices reading along Nia's steady footsteps down sterile halls. For the first time in a decade, the silence didn't hurt. He placed the watch back on the desk and whispered, "You were right, Ethan. The cure was never in the lab." The second week, Caleb came back without being told to. No cameras, no assistants, no entourage this time, just him, the faint scent of aftershave, and the hesitation of someone stepping into a world he still didn't understand. The pediatric ward greeted him with the same rhythm, the soft whir of ventilators, the faint beep of monitors, the hushed voices of nurses balancing fatigue with grace. But this time, something was different. He wanted to be here. Nia spotted him near the reception desk. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "look who didn't run for the hills." Caleb smiled slightly. "You said once a week. I try to keep my word." "Good. We have a new patient you might like." "I doubt that," he said dryly. "You'll see." She led him down the hall, stopping before room 212. The name on the chart read, Eli Turner, 8 years old. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Naya's voice softened. "He's been here 3 weeks. Smart kid. Too smart. Talks more than most adults." "Sounds terrifying already," Caleb murmured. "You'll manage," she said, smiling faintly. Inside, sunlight filtered through thin curtains, painting the room gold. Eli sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by paper airplanes and a stack of comic books. His IV line looped neatly over the rail, as if it too were part of the game. When he saw Caleb, his eyes lit up. "You're not a doctor." Caleb blinked. No." "Good," Eli said. "Doctors always talk about blood counts." "Boring," Naya chuckled. "This is Caleb. He's volunteering here." Eli squinted. "Volunteering, like, for free?" Caleb hesitated. "More or less." "That's weird," Eli said. "People don't usually do things for free." "Maybe I'm weird," Caleb replied. The boy grinned. "Cool. Then we can be weird together." For the next hour, Caleb found himself sitting on the edge of the bed, folding paper airplanes with Eli. The boy talked non-stop about superheroes, his favorite cereal, the ugly wallpaper, and how he wanted to be an astronaut if leukemia would just chill out. Caleb listened occasionally, smiling, mostly just trying to keep up. When one of his paper planes nosedived into a waste bin, Eli burst out laughing. "You're really bad at this," he said, wiping tears of laughter. "Give me a few more years," Caleb muttered. "I'm new at this volunteering thing." Eli tilted his head. "You're good at serious stuff, though, huh? You've got that thinking face. My mom used to get that when she paid bills." Something in Caleb's chest tightened. "Your mom?" Eli shrugged. "She left. Said hospitals made her sad. My dad works a lot. It's okay, though. I've got nurses and you now." Nia, who had been organizing supplies nearby, turned away slightly, pretending to check a drawer. Caleb swallowed. "You don't miss her." Eli looked down at his hands. "Sometimes, but missing people doesn't make them come back right." The simplicity of that answer left him silent. Later, when Nia stepped out to grab lunch, Eli leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." The boy's gaze was steady, unnervingly mature. "Are you scared of dying?" Caleb froze. It wasn't the question that startled him. It was how easily it cut through the air, how casually it came from the mouth of someone who shouldn't have to think about it. He started, then stopped. "That's a heavy question, Eli." The boy didn't blink. "Doctors avoid it. Nurses change the subject. My dad says I should pray, but he doesn't really do it either. So I figured I'd ask you." Caleb stared at the child. He wanted to lie to give some comforting adult answer. "No, dying's just part of life," or "You'll be fine. You're strong." But he couldn't. He looked at the boy, pale eyes too wise as the tube taped to his small hand, and realized the truth deserved better. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am." Eli tilted his head. "Why?" Caleb hesitated. "Because I couldn't save someone I loved once. And ever since, I guess I've been afraid that all the things I do, the work, the success, don't actually mean anything if I couldn't save him." Eli nodded, thinking. "Was it your kid?" "No." "My brother." "Oh." Eli fiddled with the edge of his blanket. "I think I get it." "You do?" Caleb asked softly. "Yeah, you're trying to make it up to him. That's what people do when they feel bad. My dad buys me toys he can't afford." Caleb smiled, faintly pained. "You're smarter than most adults I know." Eli grinned. "That's what my nurse says. She also says I'm a pain in the butt." She's probably right. When Nia returned, she found them both sitting on the bed, surrounded by a fleet of paper airplanes. Eli was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe properly, and Caleb for once was laughing too, a low, unguarded sound that startled even him. "What happened here?" Nia asked. His plane hit the nurse call button. Eli managed between giggles. "We summoned the cavalry." Nia shook her head, hiding a smile. "You two are trouble." Caleb shrugged. He started it. Later that afternoon, as visiting hours ended, Caleb lingered by Eli's door. The boy had fallen asleep mid-sentence, a comic book spread across his lap. The late sunlight made the room glow golden, almost holy. Caleb stood there for a long while, watching the slow rise and fall of Eli's chest. And for the first time since Ethan's death, he didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt, only a quiet ache and something gentler beneath it. Outside, Nia was updating charts at the nurse's station. "You did good today," she said when he approached. "I talked to a child for 3 hours and got schooled about life," Caleb replied. "Define good," she smiled. "That's what this place does. It humbles everyone eventually." He nodded slowly. He asked if I was afraid to die. Nia looked up. "And what did you say?" "The truth. That's rare for people like you." He frowned. "People like me, the ones who build walls out of logic and call it strength," she said simply. Her eyes softened. "Don't lose that honesty, Caleb. The kids can always tell." He looked at her, searching for something in her tone, a trace of judgment, pity, maybe admiration. But there was only calm certainty, the kind that made him feel seen and safe at the same time. "I'll try," he said. That night, back in his penthouse, Caleb walked to the window. The city glowed beneath him again, but the view felt smaller now. He poured himself a glass of water, not wine, and sat down at his desk. In front of him lay Ethan's pocket watch. He opened it, staring at the still hands frozen at 10:42. Then slowly he picked up a pen and scribbled on a scrap of paper. He asked me if I was afraid of dying. For the first time, I answered honestly. Maybe that's where life begins again. He set the note beside the watch. The ghost in the glass was still there, but it looked less lonely tonight. The rain came without warning. It hammered softly against the glass walls of Caleb's penthouse, streaking the city in blurred lines of silver. He stood by the window, a glass of untouched water in his hand, staring out into the storm as if it were speaking to him. The pocket watch lay open on the table, motionless just like every other night. But tonight, something was different. The laughter of Eli still echoed in his mind, faint yet persistent, like a melody that wouldn't fade. "Are you scared of dying?" The question had burrowed deep inside him, pulling threads he'd long buried. He turned away from the skyline, walked to his desk, and sat down. The storm outside grew louder, a percussion of memory. Then slowly, without meaning to the past, came flooding back. 10 years earlier. The house smelled like old paper medicine and unspoken fear. Caleb was 24, a genius by title, but a wreck by reality, living between lab experiments and hospital corridors. Ethan had just turned 10. His room was covered with glow-in-the-dark stars and posters of astronauts. On his bedside table sat a model rocket half-finished. "Hey, Caleb," Ethan said one evening, his voice thin but still mischievous. "You said you'd help me finish the rocket before my next birthday." Caleb smiled, ruffling his brother's hair gently. "Of course I will, but first I need to fix the compound." "The compound," Ethan repeated, grinning. "That's your magic potion, right?" Caleb chuckled. "Something like that. It's going to help kids like you someday." Ethan's eyes gleamed. "Then hurry. I don't want to miss out." Weeks passed. The compound, Gene Thera 9, consumed every second of Caleb's existence. He slept on lab benches, skipped meals, obsessed over chemical bonds and molecular failures. Every call from home went unanswered. Every text from Ethan, "When are you visiting? Can we finish the rocket left on red?" He told himself he was doing the right thing, that this sacrifice meant something, that one more breakthrough, one more sleepless night could save Ethan and others like him. Until the night the phone rang at 2 a.m., the voice on the other end was trembling. "Caleb, you need to come home, now." The memory blurred, but the hospital corridor never left him. He could still feel the cold tiles under his shoes, the static buzz of fluorescent lights. He could still hear the beeping that slowed, then stopped. He walked into the room too late. Ethan lay there impossibly small, his skin pale as the sheets. The machines had gone silent, replaced by the stillness that comes after the end. Caleb remembered dropping to his knees beside the bed. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." No answer, just the sound of his own heartbeat, frantic, useless. He grabbed his brother's hand, still warm but fading. "I was supposed to fix this," he choked. "You told me to hurry. I tried. I swear I tried." And then the faintest exhale, barely a whisper. "Why couldn't you save me, Caleb?" The words didn't come from the air. They came from inside him, burned into memory, branded into conscience. He screamed until his throat tore. The next day he went back to the lab. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't face the silence. He found the vial he'd been working on, a clear liquid just shy of stable. He held it up to the light, eyes hollow. This was supposed to save him, he said to no one. Then with one sharp motion, he smashed it to the floor. The sound glass shattering was the only thing that broke the unbearable stillness inside him. From that night onward, he made himself a vow. If he couldn't save one life, he would save thousands, whatever it took. And so BioNova Therapeutics was born, built not from ambition, but from grief. The rain grew heavier. Caleb stood and walked to the shelf, where the model rocket still sat covered in dust. He'd kept it all these years, the half-finished dream of a boy who wanted to touch the stars. He ran a finger along its smooth surface, whispering, "You would have liked Eli. He talks too much like you." He laughed softly, though it broke halfway through. The storm outside rattled the windows. He turned the pocket watch over again, tracing the initials EW, as thunder rolled in the distance. "Do you know what's funny?" he murmured, voice low. "I built a company that can stop death, but I never learned how to live with it." The second hand of the watch stayed still, just as it had for 10 years. He sat down, elbows on his knees, the room dim except for flashes of lightning reflecting off the glass. And for the first time in years, he let himself cry. Not the quiet, controlled grief of a man maintaining composure, but the raw, shaking sobs of someone finally collapsing under the weight of guilt. Tears hit the pocket watch. The engraving blurred. The room blurred. But when he looked up again through the glass wall, he saw something that made him pause. The storm had begun to break. Between the retreating clouds, a sliver of dawn light was pushing through faint but insistent. He stared at it, breathing unevenly. Later that morning, his phone buzzed a message from Nia. NIA, we're short on volunteers today. Think you can handle story time? NIA, Eli requested you specifically. Says you owe him a rematch. Caleb read the text twice, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He looked down at the model rocket again, and this time he picked it up. When he turned it over, he noticed something he had never paid attention to before, a message scribbled in childish handwriting on the underside of the rocket's fin. To Caleb, promise me you'll still look up, even when I can't. Ethan. The tears came again, but softer this time. They didn't sting, they cleansed. He whispered, voice trembling, I'm still looking, kid. I'm still trying. Then he grabbed his coat, pocketed the watch, and headed for the hospital. For the first time, it wasn't to escape his guilt, but to honor his promise. The morning light at Grady Memorial was softer than usual. Or maybe Caleb was just seeing it differently now. The hallways were the same sterile white walls, faded murals, the faint hum of machines, but the weight in his chest had shifted. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. He'd arrived earlier than anyone expected. Nia, coming out of the supply room with a clipboard, raised an eyebrow. You're here before the coffee machine's awake, she said. I had a head start, Caleb replied. Couldn't sleep. Guilt or caffeine? Neither. Maybe anticipation, her lips curved slightly, half teasing, half approval. Careful. That almost sounded like optimism. They started rounds together. Room 209, a 6-year-old recovering from bone marrow transplant. Room 214, a teenage girl who hadn't spoken since diagnosis. Room 212, Eli, who was pretending to be asleep but couldn't suppress his grin when he heard Caleb's footsteps. You're late, the boy muttered. It's 8:15, Caleb said. Exactly. I've been awake since 7:59. That's practically forever. Caleb sat beside the bed, feigning solemnity. I apologize, Commander Eli. What's the mission today? Eli pointed to a pile of crayons. We're redesigning the world. I need you to draw something. Caleb picked up a blue crayon awkwardly. I don't draw. Everyone draws. Grown-ups just forget. That line, simple, unfiltered, struck him harder than he expected. He looked at the crayon for a moment, then began to draw messy, uncertain, but genuine. When he finished, Eli squinted at the paper. That's supposed to be a dog. It's a genetically advanced creature, Caleb said dryly. Half dog, half dragon. Eli laughed so hard his Ivy monitor beeped twice. Nia rushed in alarmed until she saw the scene. Caleb was sitting cross-legged on the floor, covered in crayon marks, and Eli was howling with laughter. I swear, Nia said, suppressing a smile, you're more trouble than help. Then I'm learning from the best, he replied. Around noon, Nia handed him a mop. New mission, she said. The floor's a mess. You want to be useful? Caleb stared at the mop like it was an alien weapon. You're joking. Nope, it's character development. He sighed, rolling up his sleeves. If the board sees me like this, they'll revoke my CEO card. They'll survive, Nia said. As he worked, she stood nearby, charting patient notes. For a few moments, the world felt ordinary. When the mop slipped and splashed water across his shoes, he froze. Nia burst out laughing. That's not funny, he said, half smiling. It's a little funny. He looked down at the puddle, and then to her, surprise splashed it back toward her. She gasped. You didn't just... But he had. The next few seconds turned into chaos. Two adults half playing, half working, surrounded by laughter echoing down the hallway. Even the kids peeked out of their rooms giggling. For the first time in years, Caleb's laugh wasn't a mask. It came from somewhere deep, clean, unfiltered. Later, as they sat drying off in the staff lounge, Nia looked at him curiously. You're different today. I blame you, he said, sipping coffee. She chuckled. You used to walk in here like you were holding your breath. Now you're actually breathing. He leaned back. I think I forgot how to. Breathing, I mean. I've spent so long trying to fix everything that I never stopped to just exist. Nia's eyes softened. That's what this place does. It reminds you what existing feels like, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. In the afternoon, a small commotion erupted in room 210. A boy named Marcus refused to take his medicine, screaming that it tasted like sadness. Nurses were struggling to calm him. Caleb hesitated at the doorway, watching, unsure whether to intervene. Then Eli's words echoed in his head. Everyone draws. Grown-ups just forget. He walked in, knelt beside Marcus, and whispered, "You know what? You're right. That stuff's awful." The boy blinked, surprised. "It is, absolutely. You know what we used to do when something tasted gross," Caleb said. "Pretend it gave us superpowers," Marcus sniffled. "Like what kind?" "Depends. You look fast. Maybe you'll run at the speed of light, but you can't tell anyone. It only works if you believe it." The boy hesitated, then reluctantly drank the medicine. When it was done, he grinned. "Did it work?" Caleb smiled. "You tell me." Marcus lifted his arm dramatically. "I feel tingly. See super speed." The boy laughed and high-fived him. From the doorway, Naya watched arms folded, expression unreadable, but in her eyes there was warmth. When the day ended, they stood together by the window at the end of the corridor, watching the sun sink over the city. For once, the orange light didn't look like the color of endings. It looked like healing. "You're good with them," Naya said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "I just listen. Turns out that's all they ever needed. That's all most people ever need," she said. He looked at her, then really looked. Her hair pulled back loosely. Her scrubs wrinkled dark circles under her eyes, but her presence radiated something he hadn't felt in years: peace. "Why do you do it?" he asked softly. "Day after day. It can't just be duty," Naya smiled faintly. "Because every time I walk into a room and a kid smiles, I remember that hope is still possible, even in the ugliest places." He nodded slowly. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said, looking down at her hands. "Some nights I cry in my car before driving home, but I still come back, because someone has to." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I used to think purpose came from success. Now I think it comes from staying even when it hurts." Nia glanced at him surprised, and for a second saw not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the man underneath, tired, haunted, but learning to live again. That night, as he left the hospital, the city felt different. The noise wasn't noise anymore. It was life. He stopped by a street vendor outside the hospital gates and bought 2 paper flowers, bright red, handcrafted from recycled magazines. $2, the vendor said. Caleb handed him 20. "Keep the change." He placed one flower on the dashboard of his car and the other beside Ethan's watch on his desk later that night. The next morning, when he woke early, he noticed something he hadn't. Before the watch had caught a sliver of sunlight, the still hands gleamed softly, as if pretending to move. He smiled. Maybe healing wasn't about fixing what was broken. Maybe it was about learning to hold the broken pieces differently. The hospital never truly slept. Even at midnight, something was always humming, the soft rhythm of oxygen pumps, the whisper of rubber soles gliding across linoleum floors, the faint sighs of machines that refused to rest. But on this evening, the pediatric wing felt different, warmer, because in room 212, laughter was echoing off the walls. Okay, Eli gasped between laughs. "You can't just read like that, you have to do the voices." Caleb, sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed, with a storybook in hand, tried again, lowering his tone dramatically. And the mighty dragon roared. Eli interrupted. "No louder. You sound like a grandpa with a sore throat." From behind the curtain, Naya's voice floated in, amused. "He's not wrong." Caleb threw her a mock glare over the curtain. "I'd like to see you do better." Without missing a beat, Naya stepped into view, took the book from his hand, and began reading, her voice, rich, animated, surprisingly theatrical. Even the nurse at the station peeked in, smiling. When the story ended, Eli clapped. "You two should read together. You sound like one of those movies Mom used to play." Naya glanced at Caleb. "What do you think, a dramatic duo?" He smirked. "As long as you don't make me play the dragon again." Eli snickered. "You're totally the dragon." When Eli drifted to sleep, Naya pulled the blanket up to his chin and turned off the bedside light. The room was dim now, lit only by the glow from the hallway. Caleb lingered near the door, quiet. "You're good with him," Naya said softly, not looking up. He shook his head. "He's the one teaching me. I've spent years trying to control everything, and that kid just accepts life as it is." She smiled faintly. "Acceptance isn't weakness, you know." "I know. It's just hard." "For everyone," she replied. They stood there for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then Naya spoke again, her voice quieter. "Eli reminds me of my mom, actually. She used to say the same thing, that the only people who really understand life are the ones who've come close to losing it." Caleb glanced at her. "You've mentioned her before." Naya nodded, her gaze distant. "She was my reason for becoming a nurse. She died of ovarian cancer 6 years ago." I took every shift I could just to pay her hospital bills. By the time I cleared the debt, I'd forgotten what it felt like to rest. Her tone was calm, but the pain underneath it was raw, steady, deep, and old. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. She shrugged mildly, not out of indifference but self-protection. It's okay. I think when you see enough people fighting to live, you stop being afraid of dying. You just want to make it mean something. Caleb's throat tightened. You sound like Ethan. Her eyes met his. Your brother. He nodded slowly. He used to tell me that it's not about how long you live, but what you leave behind. And what did he leave you? Caleb smiled sadly. A promise. And a rocket I still haven't finished. Naya tilted her head, curious. Then maybe it's time you do. He looked at her, really looked. Her face in the dim light was soft, but strong, framed by fatigue and something gentler beneath. For the first time he realized she wasn't just kind, she was resilient. The next day the hospital buzzed with unusual energy. It was Friday movie night. Once a month, the pediatric staff transformed the recreation room into a mini theater using an old projector and a white bedsheet pinned to the wall. The smell of popcorn mixed with disinfectant in the air, strangely comforting. Caleb had offered to help set up. He ended up wrestling with a tangled extension cord, while Nia arranged chairs in uneven rows. You know, she said, watching him struggle, for someone who runs a biotech empire, you're terrible at plugging things in, he grunted. These cords have more personality than half my board members. She laughed, really laughed, and for a fleeting second it startled him how much he liked the sound. By the time the kids filed in, the room was buzzing. Eli waved from the front row wearing a blanket like a cape. The movie flickered onto the makeshift screen, Finding Nemo. Halfway through, when the little clownfish got lost, Naya noticed Caleb wasn't watching the screen. He was watching the children. Their faces lit by the shifting colors, their laughter unfiltered, it was the most human thing he'd seen in years. And somewhere in the middle of that laughter, something inside him cracked open, a quiet, gentle ache that wasn't grief this time. It was gratitude. When the movie ended, the room erupted in applause. Eli yawned dramatically. 10 out of 10. Would cry again. Nia chuckled. You're not supposed to review it like a critic. Eli shrugged. Somebody's gotta. Caleb leaned down and whispered, if you're going to be a critic, you need a stage name. Eli thought for a moment. Eli the Fearless. I like it, Caleb said. Has a nice ring. After the kids were tucked in, Nia and Caleb stayed behind to clean up. The room smelled faintly of butter and laughter. As Nia folded the bedsheet screen, she said, you know, when you first showed up here, I thought you'd last maybe 2 weeks. He raised an eyebrow. What changed? She smiled. You stopped trying to be perfect. He looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe I finally realized perfection's just another kind of prison. Her movement slowed. You really believe that I used to think if I worked hard enough, I could fix everything, death, grief, regret. But lately, he hesitated. Lately, I think healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about letting yourself be part of what's still alive. Naya met his gaze, and for a long moment neither of them looked away. The projector light flickered off, leaving only the soft glow of the hallway spilling through the doorway, light breaking gently through darkness. Outside, the city was quiet. They walked together to the parking lot, their footsteps echoing softly. You ever think, Caleb said, that maybe people like us, the ones who spend their lives fixing others, we do it because we don't know how to fix ourselves, Nia smiled sadly. All the time, he nodded. But I think I'm starting to learn. She looked up at the night sky, pale stars drowned by city light. Maybe that's what healing really is, not erasing the pain, just learning to live where the light still gets in. He followed her gaze, then whispered almost to himself, cracks of light. What? That's what Ethan used to say. Even the dark has cracks if you look closely enough. Naya's voice softened. Then maybe you're finally seeing them. He smiled, small, honest, new. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel divided between what he'd lost and what he still had. It just was. That night, back in his apartment, Caleb picked up Ethan's rocket. He glued the final fin into place. It wobbled slightly, imperfect but complete. He set it beside the pocket watch on his desk, the 2 symbols of his past now side by side. And in the reflection of the glass for the first time, the ghost didn't look lonely. It looked alive. It started with a headline, Billionaire CEO turns sick kids into PR campaign BioNova's volunteer stunt exposed. The article hit the news feeds just before dawn, and by noon, it was everywhere. Twitter morning talk shows, even hospital waiting rooms. The story was filled with sharp words and blurred truths. Caleb Wyatt's so-called charity work image. Rehabilitation after corporate controversy exploiting children for emotional branding. And there it was, a photo. Caleb kneeling beside Eli's bed, both laughing, crayons scattered everywhere. It should have been pure beautiful, but in print beneath a headline like that, it looked wrong. By the time Caleb reached his office, the storm had already started. Diane, his assistant, was waiting outside his glass-walled corner suite, face pale. The PR team's been calling non-stop. CNN wants a statement. The board wants to schedule an emergency meeting. Caleb pushed past her silently and walked in. His reflection in the window was ghost-like. Against the skyline, the ghost in the glass once again. How bad, he asked. Diane hesitated. Bad enough that shareholders are asking if your hospital project is a cover-up for BioNova's drug trial ethics issues. He closed his eyes briefly. They're connecting it to the Neurogene X case. Yes. And the pictures aren't helping. They say the hospital's full of our branding. It's called sponsorship, Caleb muttered. Not when the public thinks you're monetizing compassion. The words hit him harder than they should have. Monetizing compassion. He turned toward the screen on the wall. News anchors debated his intentions like he was a political scandal instead of a man. One reporter said, "Let's be honest, billionaires don't volunteer for free. There's always a narrative." Caleb switched it off. For a long time, the office was silent except for the rain beginning to fall outside. By late afternoon, the story had reached the hospital. Naya was in the middle of preparing medication when a colleague nurse, Grace, walked in with her phone. "Hey, have you seen this?" Nia glanced up, distracted. "What is it?" Grace turned the screen toward her. The image, Caleb and Eli, the headline above. Nia's stomach dropped. She read the first lines quickly, her pulse rising with every word. The article painted Caleb as a manipulator, claiming he'd staged his volunteer work to boost BioNova's family-friendly image. Grace whistled softly. "Wow, guess the rich really can spin anything." Nia forced a laugh, trying to stay neutral. "You shouldn't believe everything online." But her hands trembled when she set the chart down. That night, when Caleb arrived as usual for his shift, she didn't meet him at the door. He found her in the supply room, rearranging medication trays that didn't need rearranging. "Nia," he said quietly. She froze, then turned slowly. "So, it's true, it's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is," he exhaled. "A hit piece." "Someone at the board leaked photos from my visits. They think the volunteer work was a branding move." "Was it?" she asked. The question was simple, but the hurt behind it wasn't. His jaw tightened. "No, of course not." She studied him. "Then why didn't you tell me about the sponsorship deal before? Or that you were BioNova's CEO when you first came here?" "Because I didn't want that to matter." "It does matter," she said sharply. "You walk into a place like this with your name on every bottle of medicine, and you expect people to forget who pays the bills." Caleb took a step closer. "I came here to help, not to advertise. Then why does it look like an ad?" He hesitated, and in that pause she saw his uncertainty. It wasn't guilt, it was fatigue. She shook her head slowly. "You don't get it. These people, these kids, they trust you. I trusted you. And now I don't even know if what you feel is real or just another experiment." "Nia, no," she said, her voice trembling. "You want to do good things. Fine, but stop pretending it's not about redemption. You don't come here for them. You come here for yourself." The words landed like a blade, not cruel, just unbearably true. Caleb's chest tightened. "You think I don't know that," he said softly. "You think I haven't hated myself for it every single day." Naya's eyes filled with tears, but she turned away. "Maybe that's the problem, Caleb. You're still making it about you." He wanted to argue to defend himself, but he couldn't, because somewhere deep down, part of him knew she was right. The next morning, the board called. They wanted distance, formal legal distance. "Until the scandal clears," Richard, the CFO, said bluntly. "You're toxic PR right now. Step down temporarily." Caleb stared at the glass table in front of him. The reflection of his face fractured into 3 pieces across its polished surface. "Fine," he said. "Do it." 2 days later, he walked into the hospital again, this time not as a CEO, not even as a volunteer, just a man trying to understand where he went wrong. But the energy had changed. Nurses looked away. Conversations hushed as he passed. When he reached room 212, Eli was sitting up playing with his toy planes. "Hey," Caleb said softly, "heard you've been giving everyone trouble." Eli grinned. "Only the mean ones. Am I on that list?" "Not yet." Caleb smiled faintly. "You heard about the news?" Eli nodded, serious now. "Yeah. Nurse Naya said sometimes people lie on the internet. Are they lying about you?" He hesitated. "They're confused." Eli studied him. "You look sad." "I am. Why?" "Because I tried to help people and I made things worse." Eli tilted his head. "You didn't make me worse." Caleb blinked. The boy smiled softly. "You read stories. You make me laugh. That's not bad." For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. The lump in his throat was too heavy. He nodded. "Thanks, buddy." "Will you come back next week?" Eli asked. "I'm not sure if I'm allowed." Eli frowned. "That's dumb. You're the dragon. Dragons don't quit." Caleb laughed quietly, the sound broken and warm at once. "I'll try not to." When he left the hospital, reporters waited outside the gate, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Wyatt, do you regret what happened? Was it all a PR strategy? Are you resigning from BioNova?" He said nothing. He just kept walking past the noise, past the cameras, into the quiet of the street beyond. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that made the whole world feel heavier. Inside his pocket, his fingers brushed against Ethan's pocket watch. For years that weight had symbolized guilt. Now it just felt still. He whispered to himself, "How do you fix something when doing good turns into doing harm?" There was no answer, only the wind carrying the echo of voices behind him and the faint memory of a child's voice saying, "You didn't make me worse." That night in his apartment, he turned on the news again. Another headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. BioNova CEO under fire, internal audit pending. He muted the sound and sat there staring at the silent broadcast. For a long time, he didn't move. Then slowly he reached for the pocket watch and set it on the table. Its reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, two versions of himself staring back, the man who'd built everything and the man who'd finally lost what mattered most. He whispered into the empty room, "Maybe losing everything is the only way to find what's real." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. 3 days after the scandal, the hospital lights felt dimmer. Even laughter sounded thinner, the kind that tried to fill a silence too heavy to ignore. Nia hadn't seen Caleb since their confrontation in the supply room. The empty space he'd left behind was louder than his presence had ever been. She tried to bury herself in work charts, évreux, rounds, but every hallway reminded her of him, the sound of his low voice reading to Eli, the way he smiled when the boy teased him, the light that had finally returned to his eyes. Now that light was gone, and worse, Eli was getting sicker. It started subtly, a cough that wouldn't fade, a dip in his energy, his color dulling, his voice quieter. Then the numbers began to change, white blood cell count dropping, fever rising, heart rate erratic. By the end of the week, Eli was on oxygen, his small body trembling under the weight of the disease he'd fought so bravely. Naya stood beside his bed, watching the monitor flash red. She'd seen hundreds of children fade before, but never him. Never the one who'd given her and Caleb a reason to believe again. "Come on, little dragon," she whispered, brushing the hair from his forehead. "You said you wouldn't quit." Eli's eyelids fluttered. Tired, he breathed. Her throat tightened. "I know, baby. I know." When she left the room, she went straight to the attending physician. "Dr. Myers," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "Eli's counts are crashing. What are our options?" Myers hesitated. "We've exhausted the standard protocols. His leukemia is resistant to treatment now. The only possible chance would be a trial medication." Nia's heart skipped. Which one? BioNova's Neurogene X, derivative, the pediatric variant? It's experimental, unapproved. We'd need special authorization from the company. BioNova, she repeated, her voice trailing. The name hung between them like a curse. That night, she drove through Atlanta's rain-slick streets until she reached the building she'd sworn she'd never step into, again BioNova headquarters. Security hesitated when she entered the lobby in scrubs soaked to the bone, but when she said, "I need to see Caleb Wyatt," something in her tone, urgent, desperate, made them hesitate just long enough. Minutes later, she was standing outside his office door. He was there, sitting in the dark, tie, loosened sleeves, rolled up, a glass of untouched whiskey, beside a pile of news clippings and resignation letters. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside filled the silence. Then she said simply, "Eli's dying." Caleb's eyes widened. "What?" "The chemo's failed. He needs the Neurogene X pediatric trial drug, the one your lab developed." He stood immediately alert. "That drug isn't approved yet, Naya." "The side effects." "I don't care about side effects," she snapped. "He doesn't have time for side effects." Caleb took a step closer, hands trembling. "It's not that simple. Legally, I can't authorize it. Not after the audit. I've been suspended from any clinical authority." "Then find someone who can." He looked at her, helpless, broken. "If I sign that release without FDA clearance and something happens to him," she cut him off, voice cracking. "Something is happening to him. Caleb, he's dying right now while you sit here hiding behind legal memos and fear." The words hit like thunder, but she didn't stop. "You wanted redemption. Here it is, not in boardrooms, not in donations, not in headlines, just one boy, one life. That's all it takes." He stared at her jaw, tight tears glistening in his eyes. "You think I don't want to help?" His voice shook. "I've lived my entire life trying to save people and losing the ones I love anyway. If I fail again, then you'll fail doing the right thing," she said fiercely. And that's more than most people ever do. For a long moment, they just stood there, two exhausted souls drenched in rain and regret facing a choice that could destroy them both. Finally, Caleb moved to his desk, pulling out his laptop. His hands trembled as he opened the encrypted database. "Dosage protocol weight adjusted," he muttered under his breath. Naya watched her heart pounding. When he reached the authorization page, he paused, cursor hovering over the line that read Executive Approval Signature. "This could end me," he whispered. Naya stepped closer, eyes wet but steady. It could save him, and that was all it took. He signed. They drove through the storm in silence. The hospital loomed ahead, glowing faintly through the rain, like a sanctuary, or a sentence he couldn't tell which. Inside, nurses scrambled as they arrived. Dr. Myers glanced at the vial in Caleb's hand, eyes wide. "Is that what I think it is?" "Administer it," Naya said firmly. Myers hesitated. "It's not approved. I'll take full responsibility," Caleb interrupted. He said it calmly with a kind of stillness that made the entire room fall silent. When the IV line connected, the liquid ran clear, almost luminous. Caleb stood beside the bed, one hand gripping the rail. Nia watched the monitors, heart rate 78, then 72, then 70, too slow, her chest constricted. "Come on, Eli, stay with me." Caleb's knuckles turned white around the bed rail. Every beep was a countdown to the past. He couldn't relive another brother, another failure. Then suddenly, a flat line. The sound tore through the room like a blade. "No," Naya whispered, voice breaking. "Not this time." Caleb froze. His body moved before his mind caught up. He pressed his palms onto Eli's small chest, starting compressions. "Come on, kid. Breathe. You're not done yet." Naya's voice trembled through tears. "Eli, please." The room blurred into noise, shouting footsteps, alarms, and then a sound, a faint miraculous beep, then another, then another. The line on the monitor fluttered back to life. Naya let out a sob, half disbelief, half prayer. She looked at Caleb, who was shaking, tears streaming down his face. He whispered hoarse, "You stubborn little dragon." Hours later, the ward was quiet again. Eli slept peacefully, color slowly returning to his cheeks. The new drug had stabilized him, at least for now. Naya stood by the window watching the first light of dawn break over the city. Caleb stood beside her, his hands still trembling faintly. "You'll be reported for this," she said softly. "I know. They might arrest you." He nodded. "Maybe that's fair." She turned to him. "I'm sorry for what I said before. About you doing this for yourself." He gave a small, tired smile. "You were right. I started for me. But tonight, it wasn't about redemption. It was about him." Nia's voice broke. "You saved him." Caleb shook his head gently. "No, we did." When the doctors cleared the room, Naya sat down beside Eli, brushing his hair back. Caleb lingered at the doorway. The sun had risen fully now, spilling gold light across the floor, warm, fragile, pure. For the first time, it didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like peace. Morning arrived without mercy. The hospital buzzed with whispers before the coffee machines even started. Every nurse, every intern, every passing orderly had already heard the story. The suspended BioNova CEO administered an unapproved drug to save a child. By noon, Reporters were outside the gates again. Flashes popped. Headlines multiplied. This time, they weren't just questioning motives, they were questioning morality itself. Inside room 212, everything was quiet. Eli was awake, pale weak, but smiling faintly, a paper dragon clutched in his hand. Caleb sat beside him, exhaustion drawn deep into the lines around his eyes. "Hey, dragon tamer," Eli whispered. Caleb leaned forward, smiling softly. "Hey, yourself. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck." Caleb chuckled. "That's the medicine talking." Eli blinked slowly. "So, did it work?" Caleb hesitated. Too soon to tell. "But you're here. That's a good start." The boy nodded, then reached out weakly. "Promise me something." Caleb leaned closer. "Anything. Don't stop coming. Even if they say you can't." The words pierced him like sunlight through storm clouds. He swallowed hard. "I promise." When Caleb stepped out into the hallway, Naya was waiting, arms folded, eyes tired but steady. "They'll come for you," she said quietly. "Hospital administration called this morning. So did the FDA. I figured. Do you regret it?" He looked at her, really looked, then shook his head slowly. "No. For the first time in a decade, I did something that mattered." She exhaled, emotion flickering behind her composure. "They might charge you, Caleb. Unauthorized medical intervention, risk of patient harm. Then I'll take it." "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because this time I didn't act to erase my guilt. I acted because a little boy believed in me. That's not something you run from." They walked together to the front lobby. Outside the glass doors, a sea of microphones waited like vultures. Caleb stopped. "Looks like the circus has grown." Nia touched his arm lightly. "You don't owe them anything." He turned to her. "I owe myself something. The truth." And before she could stop him, he pushed open the doors and stepped into the light. The crowd erupted. "Mr. Wyatt, did you break the law? Was this about BioNova's image? Are you prepared to face prosecution?" He raised a hand, steady but calm. The noise dimmed slightly. "I didn't come here to defend myself," he began. "I came here to tell you why I did what I did." Dozens of cameras focused on him, his voice though low carried. "There's a boy in there fighting for his life. His name is Eli Turner. When I met him, he didn't care who I was or how much money I had. He cared about dragons and laughter and courage. He made me realize something, that the price of happiness isn't measured in dollars or success, but in what we're willing to risk for someone else." He paused. Behind him, Naya stood watching through the glass, tears glinting in her eyes. "I broke protocol, yes. I took a risk I wasn't supposed to. But I do it again because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the comfortable thing." The reporters scribbled, the cameras flashed, but for once the noise didn't matter. Caleb turned and walked back inside, straight toward the officers waiting near the reception desk. He nodded once, wordless, and held out his wrists. They hesitated, as if the act of cuffing him felt somehow wrong. But rules were rules. Naya moved forward instinctively. "Wait!" He stopped her, with a look steady, resolute, almost peaceful. "It's okay," he said softly. "This is part of it." The drive to the precinct was silent. Rain streaked down the windows, turning the city into smears of gray and light. Caleb sat in the back seat, wrists bound, but for the first time in years, his chest felt light. He remembered Ethan's voice, distant, warm, eternal. "Promise me you'll still look up, even when I can't." He looked up now at the faint streak of dawn piercing the storm clouds, and he smiled. Hours later, Naya walked into the hospital chapel, empty except for a flickering candle. She sat in the last pew, her scrub still damp, her hands trembling. When she closed her eyes, all she could see was Caleb's face as he turned to the crowd, calm, fearless, free. She whispered, "God, if redemption has a shape, let it look like that man." Then she heard a faint voice behind her. Nurse Naya Eli stood at the doorway, a 4-pole in hand, weak but smiling. She rushed over. "You shouldn't be out of bed." "I wanted to see the dragon." Her breath hitched. "He's not here right now." Eli nodded solemnly. "Then I'll wait. Dragons always come back." She knelt, tears spilling freely this time. "You really believe that?" "Yeah," Eli said softly, looking up toward the stained glass window, where light poured through in fractured rainbows. "Because sometimes, even when people disappear, the things they do keep shining." That night, as the city quieted, a news ticker scrolled across television screens. BioNova CEO Caleb Wyatt, under investigation after unapproved drug saves child's life. Public opinion, divided hero or criminal. But in room 212, the only headline that mattered was, "This patient stable, condition improving." Eli slept soundly, clutching the paper dragon in one hand. Beside his bed on the nightstand sat a small, folded note. Naya had found it earlier, written in Caleb's handwriting, neat but trembling. "Happiness can't be bought, but it can be shared. Take care of him and yourself. CWW." The charges against Caleb were still pending, the investigation ongoing. But quietly, almost invisibly, letters began arriving at the hospital, from parents, from patients, from people who had once been saved by BioNova's drugs. Thousands of them, all saying the same thing in different words. If compassion is a crime, then the world needs more criminals like him. The noise of the scandal began to fade, replaced by something gentler, stronger belief. Nia stepped out of the hospital after her shift. The city was waking. She glanced up, the same Atlanta sky, gray and gold at once. And there, against the light, she saw a familiar silhouette across the street, a man in a gray coat, hair damp from rain, carrying a paper bag of coffee cups. He met her eyes, smiled. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. Caleb crossed the street slowly, hands in pockets. "No cuffs today," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "They dropped the charges." "Pending review," he said, but they realized something. It's hard to prosecute someone for saving a life. She exhaled shakily. "You came back. I promised him," he said simply. "And you." They stood there for a long moment, just watching each other, the morning light painting them in gold. Then Naya smiled through tears. "You know the world's still going to judge you." Caleb nodded. "Let them. I finally know who I am." As they walked back toward the hospital side by side, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Its rays poured across the glass walls, scattering into thousands of reflections, like cracks of light, multiplied, unstoppable. And in that light, every scar, every loss, every failure no longer looked like something broken, but like something reborn. 1 year later, Atlanta had changed colors. Autumn fell upon the city in slow motion, golden leaves spinning down like fragments of memory. Behind Grady Memorial Hospital, a small garden had been built, the Garden of Tomorrow. Each stone carried the name of a child who once fought, healed, or simply lived there. On the white wall at the back of the garden, a line was engraved by hand. "Not all heroes wear coats. Some just hold your hand when you're scared." Nia stood quietly, her nurse's uniform crisp, her hair tied back, her eyes soft and far away. The wind carried the scent of lavender, the same scent that used to linger on her mother's pillow and in the long nights she'd worked beneath the humming fluorescent lights. A voice broke the silence. "Latte for the nurse who doesn't know how to rest." She turned. Caleb stood there, calm smile, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You're early," she said, surprised. "I have more free time these days." "No board meetings want me anymore," he said lightly. "I heard you left BioNova." He nodded. "Sold my shares. Used most of it to start the Ethan Foundation funding. Pediatric cancer research. The rest..." He glanced toward the volunteers repainting the benches. "I used it to buy something money once couldn't." Her brow lifted slightly. "And what's that piece?" She smiled faintly. "Expensive purchase," he smiled back. "Worth every cent." They walked to the stone benches near the fountain. A bronze plaque gleamed softly in the light, "For those who taught us how to love without fear. E.W. Ethan Wyatt." Naya read it silently. "You've kept your promise to your brother." Caleb looked up at the sky. "If he were still here, he'd laugh at me, say it took me 10 years to learn the simplest truth. No one is truly saved until they learn to love." Nia nodded gently. "You know, I used to think love made people weak, but now I realize it's the only thing strong enough to change them." "And to forgive," Caleb added, turning to her. "Thank you for forgiving me." She smiled softly. "No one's perfect, Caleb, but you chose right when everyone else chose silence. That's enough." Suddenly, laughter burst from across the garden. Eli, now 9 years old, healthy and bright in a red hoodie, was running between the flower beds holding a small rocket model. "Nurse Nia, Mr. Caleb, look." He waved the rocket high, sunlight glinting off the plastic. "It's the one you told me about. I named it Dragon 1. Caleb chuckled. "Dragon 1, huh? I like it, but does it fly? I'm testing it." Eli grinned, taking position. 3, 2, 1. He threw it skyward. The rocket twirled, caught the wind, then fell to the grass, rolling a few times before stopping. Eli ran to pick it up, laughing. It'll go higher next time. You'll see. Caleb watched him, eyes bright with something but gentle, that quiet wonder of a man who had learned how to believe again. Naya smiled. That kid is our little miracle. He shook his head. No, he's his own miracle. We just got lucky enough to witness it. The ceremony began soon after. Doctors, parents, and children gathered around the fountain, each holding a candle. A physician spoke softly, honoring those who had survived and those who hadn't. Nia's fingers trembled slightly as she held her candle. Beside her, Caleb lit another, his expression solemn. "Who's yours for?" he asked. She looked at the flame. "For my mother. For everyone I couldn't save." He nodded, lighting his own. "Mine's for Ethan. And for the one who reminded me that compassion is the only thing money can't buy." Their eyes met through the candlelight, warm, steady, full of quiet understanding. No words were needed. When the ceremony ended, Eli ran over, hugging them both. "I have a gift for you." He pulled 3 postcards from his hoodie pocket, drawn in crayon. One showed the hospital garden, another the Dragon 1 rocket, and the last one, 3 figures holding hands under a star-filled sky. In messy handwriting at the top, he'd written, "Happiness doesn't need to be bought, only shared." Nia laughed softly, tears glistening. "Who taught you that, sweetheart?" Eli grinned. "Nobody. I just heard Mr. Caleb say it once, but it sounded true." Caleb touched the drawing, gently, voice low and rough. "It is true." As the afternoon faded, the garden emptied out. Caleb and Naya stayed watching the kids play by the fountain, their laughter echoing through the air. "Do you ever wonder," Naya asked quietly, "what the world would be like if happiness could really be bought with money?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Then the world would be poor, because when everything can be bought, no one remembers how to give." She tilted her head. "And if it can't be bought, then we have to learn how to make it," he said, "bit by bit, with our hands, our hearts, and sometimes our mistakes." Nia was silent for a moment, then whispered, "If only happiness could be bought." Caleb turned to her, eyes warm. "I wouldn't have enough money for it," he said, half teasing, half true. She laughed through her tears. "Probably not." He smiled softly. "But I finally know how to earn it." As they walked out of the garden, the golden light of dusk stretched across the path. Eli ran ahead, laughter trailing behind him like music. Nia walked beside Caleb, the air scented with lavender and sunlight. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small object, Ethan's pocket watch. He opened it. For the first time in 10 years, the second hand quivered, not from the mechanism restarting, but from sunlight refracting through the glass, making it shimmer as if alive again. He looked at Nia and smiled. "Maybe time finally forgave me," she replied softly. "Not time, you did. 1 year, 1 journey, 1 choice." Caleb had once possessed everything money could buy and lost everything that couldn't. But today, in a garden filled with laughter, he understood at last, happiness isn't found in what we own, but in what we give, even if it's just a smile, a hand to hold, or a moment lived with honesty. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in quiet moments, a heartbeat, returning a smile through tears, a promise kept. The price of happiness isn't about saving the world. It's about saving one life and finding your own in the process. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because sometimes the smallest story can remind someone that hope is still alive.